so it's 12 o'clock, so I think we will get started. So first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Malcolm Calvert. I'm the director of the Paramics Microsecurity team at Sistra, and I'm joined today by Graham Smith. Graham is a principal transport consultant at Sistra. He's a very experienced Paramics user and has delivered many training courses and workshop sessions like this. He's also been involved in very kind of interesting and complex Paramics models. So you're in very good hands with Graham today. So this is the first of 4 sessions that we're going to be running over the month of June. This one's going to look at good practice and network reviewing. Next week, we're going to be looking at a case study on low emission zones. We're going to look in detail at outputs from Paramics Discovery the following week. And then the final session will be on our software news, newest developments and features coming to Paramics Discovery this year. So hopefully within those 4 workshop sessions, there'll be lots of value for you as Paramics users or those interested in Paramics to learn more about how it can be used and, I guess, improve your practice. And that's really what our goal is with these workshop sessions, is to help you use Paramics more effectively and get as much value from it as you possibly can. Just a few things to say about how we're going to do the session this morning. It is being recorded, so just to make you aware of that, and you will receive a link to the recording at the end of the session. We'll also post it on our YouTube channel and support center afterwards for anyone who wasn't able to make it today. There's a chat function in the platform that we're using, Livestorm, so please feel free to chat, add comments. If you've got any thoughts on things that Graham is saying and sharing, please let us know. We'd love to interact with you in the chat function. There's also a questions tab, and again, feel really free to post any questions and we will try and answer those during the session. Today, we may answer them in the middle of the session, but we're also going to leave time, 10 or 15 minutes at the end to answer questions. So there should be lots of time for questions. Now, one option is you can type a question and we can answer it in that way, but we'd also love to get a little bit of interaction from other people, so you're not just listening to myself and Graham this afternoon. And so if you want to come on the chat and ask a question or just make a comment in person, then please just let us know and we can bring you in at the end. And it'd be nice to hear from others, because there's a wealth of experience of using Paramics on this webinar today, and it'd be nice to share some of that as well. There's also a poll function, and we might try that as we go along. I'll see if there's any things that might be interesting to ask you as Graham's talking, perhaps on how you use certain aspects of Paramics. Okay, so I think that's all from me for now. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Graham, who's going to lead this session on good practice and network reviewing.
Thanks, Malcolm. Hi, everyone. Just before I start, if there is any problems with hearing me or seeing the screen or anything, please put something in the chat and Malcolm will monitor that and hopefully get any problems sorted out. As Malcolm said, today I'm going to be talking about good practice and network reviewing. So in general, building a Paramics Discovery model is fairly quick and easy, but making sure the model has been built correctly can be more challenging and just as important. In this session, I'm going to go through an overview of the model review process, showing the general principles of how we check a model, whilst also mentioning some good practice, particularly in relation to some of the newer features, and also demonstrate some of the common errors that we come across when we review a model. So as was mentioned, any questions, please type in the chat as we go, and Malcolm's going to monitor those and either respond or save them till the end. And I'm going to get started with the first section of reviewing the model, which is sort of going to be termed initial model review. The first thing is to do with the version. So unfortunately, there's no straightforward way of finding out what version a model should be in from the file before it's opened. So we found in general it's good practice and very straightforward to just include the version name in the file name. This is helpful, especially if you're picking up someone else's model. You can quickly see what version you want to open it in. So I can see this version, this model I'm opening in version 24.4. And here it is. Once I've got the model open, the next thing to check is have any errors or warnings been flagged. I can see here the yellow triangle is indicating that I've got a warning. It would be a red circle with a cross if I had an error, and I can click on that and it brings up the status reporter, and I can check what my warnings are, if it's something I want to look at now or look at later as I review my model. I'm going to clear that and close the reporter for now. The other way to get the reporter open, if you don't have the triangle or the cross appear, is in model and reporter. So now I've got my model open and I'm happy with the errors and warnings that I've got. So I'm going to now look at the overall network settings. The easiest way to do that is to use model and then settings report. So this has a list of all the overall global network settings in my model in this column value, whilst also showing a list of the default values. And this is useful because it highlights anything that has been changed from default in bold and in blue. So we can quickly see, has anything been changed from default? And then I can cross-reference that with maybe a model development report that you've been provided with as well to see, does that make sense? Is it reasonable? It's not necessarily wrong to change a value from default, but if it has been changed from default, it's probably something you want to check. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to have a look at my overlay. So I've already got my overlay loaded in this model. I'm going to go to the Styles menu under Edit Network and toggle on Overlays. The hotkey for that is O. It brings on my overlay. And what I want to check, first of all, for this overall part of the session is the overlay in the correct place geographically? It should be, that should have happened, especially if your DXF that you brought in was correctly, had the correct coordinate system. And the way to check that is to right-click anywhere and go to either the map, satellite, or street view, and you can then see quite quickly, has that taken me to the right part of Google Maps. The reason that's useful, or one of the main reasons that's useful, is if you're looking at any GIS-related outputs, then if it's in the right place, then that'll link up much more straightforwardly in your outputs. I'm just going to turn my overlay off. And before I start looking at the actual network itself, there are some more settings to look at overall, and these are to do with the assignment and routing. So these settings only apply if you've got route choice in your model. As you can see here, there's quite a lot of routes, so I do have route choice in my model, but if you've got a simple single junction or small corridor model, these settings won't apply. But as I say, I do have route choice, so I'm going to go to model and routing settings. There's two sections to this, generalized cost and dynamic assignment. If I take generalized cost first, I can see that toggled on is generalized cost equations by individual vehicle type, which is what I'd expect. So it's reflecting different routing patterns by vehicle type. And if I see the cost equations used, I can see that I've got different distance coefficients by vehicle type. And again, I can check these, cross-reference them with what I'm expecting. Maybe they've come from a higher tier model or been calculated in some other way. I can review those there. And I can also check dynamic assignment. So I think in pretty much all route choice models, I'd expect to see dynamic assignment enabled, which allows familiar drivers to make route choice based on delay as it builds up in the model. So if a queue builds up in a certain location, a familiar driver might reroute to a different route. So I can see that's enabled, and with an interval of 2 minutes and a smoothing factor of 0.5. So these values of 2 minutes and 0.5 are ones that I think I always see used in models, and they've been derived empirically over using models over the years, many different models, usually with these factors. And if different ones are used, you end up either getting too much reassignment for queuing or too little. So these tend to be the ones that are used, and I'd expect to see those noted in a report as well. So another thing that impacts on routing is perturbation and familiarity. So those are applied by vehicle type. So I'm going to check that under edit network and vehicle types. So I can see I've got my car vehicles type selected here, and familiarity and perturbation here. These are things that can be missed because they're in the vehicle types editor, possibly. So you'd expect to see values in here and not just zeros. So for familiarity, for light vehicles, cars, LGVs, that sort of thing, I'd expect to see a familiarity of somewhere between 30% and 70% familiar. And for heavy vehicles, somewhere between 0 and 40%. These very much depend on the nature of the model and the nature of the study area, what the exact values are. You can see here I've got car, I've got 60%. If I go to my LGV, I've also got 60%. And my heavy vehicle types, I've got 5% familiarity, which is in line with those values suggested. Perturbation is for all my vehicle types set at 5. So perturbation allows for for all vehicle types actually to make route choice decisions on top of the cost equation. Sorry, that's poorly explained. So when the vehicles calculate their routes based on the generalized cost coefficients, they calculate the cheapest route. And then if I've got a perturbation of 5, which is a percentage, they'll add on an extra 5% to that cost and see if any other routes fall within that window, and then they will potentially use these as well. So it's to reflect some variation in route choice that vehicles will make between origin and destinations. So as I say, 5 is the standard value used there. And again, these are things that can be missed because they're in the vehicle types editor rather than in a general settings, because they can be set separately by vehicle type. Another thing that affects the routing and a bit more sort of into network coding is the road hierarchy, and that can be easily checked in the styles menu. And if I expand under links and change the outline style, I'm going to change it to major and minor. And what I can see here is I can quickly see that I've got major and minor links, major in red, minor in blue, and I can have a look at the whole network and see if anything stands out. So for me here, the first thing that stands out is this section of blue, and looks a little unusual because it's in with a bunch of major links, but I know from having developed this model that actually there's a sort of village in this area with a lot of traffic calming measures, and that I've explained this in the report that actually this is avoided by vehicles who will make slightly longer route choices to go round that area. So that is, although it looks slightly odd, is acceptable and has been done on purpose. And I can also see if there's anything that's less obvious. For example, if I zoom in a bit, I've got one blue link here in the middle of a section of red links, and it's quite easy to accidentally have miss a link when you're coding, especially if you're changing between major and minor, for example. So what's probably happened here is that this link has been missed as I've been coding the network. And actually, I would want to address that because that's probably a mistake, whereas this has been done on purpose. So that would be something that it's quite easy to see from this view, and I can just look around the whole network and see if there's anything else that stands out. Also in this menu, I can change to, for example, urban and highway. It doesn't affect routing, but it has the same ease of checking whether urban and highway have been used correctly. So I've got one section of highway through the network for this main road, and then everything else as urban. Final thing on this section I'm going to move on to is cost factors. So checking cost factors is actually, in version 25, is going to move into network review, which should make it even easier. But at the moment, the best way to check them is using the inspector. So if I go to Edit Network and Inspector, which is here, the inspector allows me to check the attributes of various different parts of my model. So because I'm looking at cost factors, they're a link-based attribute. So I've got links selected in my inspector, and I'm going to right-click along the top and turn on category cost factor and link cost factor. If I scroll along here, I can see this list down the side of all my links. I've got 30 pages, so I can scroll through all of them. And what I do for the easiest way of checking things like cost factors is I can sort the column of cost factor, either up or down, and that will highlight any that are particularly high or particularly low. So I can check that against the report, see if my cost factors match what I'm expecting to see, and I can also quickly see if there's any very high or low values in either link or category cost factor that are standing out. So that might be anything high might be something over 2, anything low something over something under 0.4. There isn't exactly a fixed rule, but anything in that sort of area you'd want to be having a look at to see, is this sensible? Is this sensible to be used in this location? And has it been done on purpose? While we're in the inspector, I'll just show quickly, you can check every link attribute in the link section of the inspector. So I could check visibility, sort by that. I can sort by speed, check if there's anything unusual in the speed limit column. And I can also check other attributes. So I can look at nodes. And in fact, this is probably the easiest way of checking signpost distance of nodes, not related to routing, but I can sort by signpost distance and see, okay, these 4 are lower than the default of 250. So I can check on those and zoom in and see, has that been done for a reason? Is it sensible? Yes, okay. So next, I'm going to look at reviewing the network itself. So this, understandably, takes up the bulk of time in a model audit or review. But obviously, in the next few minutes, I'm just going to go through it quite quickly and just try and give more of an overview. So the first thing is the overall model layout. Have approximately the right number of nodes being used. It's the sort of thing we look for. You don't want too many nodes because that can slow the simulation down, make vehicles make too many decisions, but you don't want too few because you want a broadly accurate representation of the network. If I'm happy with that, I'm going to bring the overlay back on with the hotkey O and bring my curb points back on with K. And what I'm looking for here is as accurate as I can reflection of the road outline with my curbs. So if I zoom in on this junction, for example, I can see that the curb points are pretty close to matching the red line indicating the curb of my network. You might also notice that there are curved lines between these curbs. So these have been included in version 24 because previously it would be drawing a straight line between them, but these curves have been included for visual reasons to make it look better. when we're visualizing the model. If once I've swept through my model and checked are my curbs in the right place, in fact, what you'll notice here is that the curb points here that are highlighted in blue are ones that have been moved from default. And you'd expect to see a lot of them have, and you can see here that the majority of my curb points are not at default and have been moved. And if you open up a model and see that most of your curb points are at default, that would probably be a red flag that not enough work has been done on getting the model to match the overlay. Once I've looked through those, the next thing to move on to is lane points. I know these are, I'm going to move over to a different part of the model. These are very important for the model performance. So the lane points dictate the vehicle movements. So I've just turned on the trajectories here, and if I just move one of my lane points, I'm sure most people know this, but the lane points control the trajectories, and the trajectories are the actual paths the vehicles take. So you can see as I move the lane point, the trajectory becomes different. It can be controlled or is controlled by these lane points. And what you want to see is nice, smooth, realistic movements indicated by the trajectories between your lane points. And in fact, looking at these allows me to check out the vehicle movements without actually watching the model in Visualize. So you can get a good idea before you get to that stage if your vehicle movements are going to be sensible. So you want to see smooth movements and realistic movements, and that's especially the case at roundabouts where the default positions are often not that helpful, and you want to see that a bunch of, or the majority of lane points have been moved from default. Now, one thing that comes up a lot when we do a review or an audit is lane points at giveways or at signals. So if I take this, for example, this is a giveaway point here to this main road. And what you want to see is these lane points, which will be where the vehicles actually stop as they give way. You want to see them in the correct position for where vehicles in reality do stop when they're giving way. So I can see this is very close to the main road because vehicles pull right up to the giveaway point to look for their gap. The reason this is important is because if they're in the wrong place, you'll be either underestimating or overestimating the capacity. So if I just reset this lane point and this lane point to default position, what you can see is they've jumped back, and you can see they're not shaded blue. And if I don't move these and just leave them here, I'll be underestimating the capacity of the vehicles exiting this link because the lane points aren't where they should be. They should be further forward. So it's important, particularly at junctions, to get these lane points in the right spot. There's a sort of opposite issue you get at signal junctions. So if I just move over to a signal junction I've got down here, what we see is that at signal junctions, quite often, the places where vehicles stop when they're on red, which again is controlled by the lane points, is often further back than the default position of the lane points would be. And that's usually because there might be a advanced cycle section or a stop line here or a pedestrian crossing, which means that the lane points often need pulled back. Otherwise, we'll be overestimating the capacity of the signal junction. You can see the same up here as I've pulled these lane points all the way back. And if I reset these lane points to default, excuse me, we can see they jump forward. So moving them back it'll be more realistic, but it will lower the capacity of the junction, and I want to be very careful that I'm not overestimating it by having the lane points too far forward. So again, it's important to have the lane points positioned correctly at junctions, and that is something that we see come up very often when we're looking at model reviews or audits. Next thing that I'm going to look at, if I zoom out a bit, is link categories, edit network and categories. So I've got the categories editor here. And this is a list of the different types of links I've got in my model. So I can see I've got various different speed limits, and I've got different road names used as well. And I can cycle through these and see the different features of each of these lane types. And I can also, if I go back to the styles menu, use the same link outline section, change it to link category, and I can review the application of my link categories across my model in a fairly straightforward way based on the link outline color that I specify in here. So I can check if my 30 mile an hour has been applied correctly and my 40 mile an hour sections are correct, and that sort of thing. The next thing to look at is I'm going to quickly look at zones. So I've got my zones on. If I click on a zone, there are two types. We've got area inside, if I bring up the properties, area inside polygon or user-defined portals. So this is the different ways of defining what type of links or how the zones load vehicles onto links. So this one is area inside polygon. So this will load onto any links that are more than half inside this shape. So I can see the links here are shaded in purple and green because they're being used by this zone. If I move the zone back, you can see they lose the shading. And if I move it forward, it gains more links. So what I want is the zone to be placed like this with the correct links used. And I also want the zone to be more than a link away from the junction. So if I take this one, for example, it's near the junction, but I do have a link in between the loading and the junction. And that's because it's for two reasons. One, for behavioral reasons in terms of lane choice, and two, because the outputs don't necessarily collect correctly if you have the vehicles loading on immediately adjacent to a junction. The other type of zone is zone loading is with portals. So I've got a few of those in this model. So if I click on zone 19, for example, and zoom in, I can see I've got two portals, one up here, one down here. And I've got 90% using portal 1 and 10% using portal 2, of course, to a total of 100%. And I want to make sure that all of my portal totals for each individual zone adds up to 100%. And the quickest way to do that is, again, going back to the inspector, edit network and inspector, and change it this time to zones. And I've got this column here is total demand percentage. So if I sort by that, I can see that while most of them are adding up to 100, I have got these four entries at the top here, which say 90%. So obviously I can't be having 90% of the demand associated with a zone being used, because that is not good at all. So if I click on one of these entries, it takes me to that zone, and there are four entries because I've got the four portals associated with this zone, and then I can either edit that or get the model of whose model you're checking to correct that, because that'll need to be sorted and need to be added up, need to add up to 100. I'm going to move on to junctions now. I realize there's a lot of information here, and obviously junctions are some of the most important parts of the model. So I'm just going to have a very quick overview of the key things we look for here. Three types of junctions. Simple priority junction. What we're looking for is the movements, major, medium, the movements and the priorities. So we've got major, medium, minor. Are they applied correctly? You can see here, yes. So I've got my movements turned on, which the hotkey for that is Shift M. And then I would just sweep through the model and check the priorities at each of my priority junctions. There isn't a way of doing this globally because each junction is different and has its own movements. Roundabouts, the main thing that people get wrong at roundabouts is the lane usage. So I've got these yellow arrows are my roundabout movements. They can also be turned on and off in styles, and they indicate what lanes vehicles are using for each movement at the roundabout. So for example, this lane is indicating it's left only, whereas this lane is ahead and right. And I can check using mapping that that is correct, it matches what's marked on the ground. And the final type of junction is signal junction, and what we're looking for here is the signal timing. So if I just turn on the nodes again and go to edit signals, what I'm looking for here is, do the time frames used seem sensible? So here I've got an AM, an interpeak, and a PM sort of time frame. Do the timings look reasonable? Do they change between time frame, and have reasonable looking intergreens being used? So I don't necessarily need the detailed signal information to check this. I can just check if it looks sensible. And that is sort of a brief overview of the junctions. But the most useful aspect of, or the most useful way of checking a network in Discovery is using network review, which is in styles. So if I go to edit network and styles, I'm sure some of you have used this before, but this section down here allows me to toggle on various largely non-physical attributes of the network and check through them. And I'm just going to look in a little bit of detail at some of the newer features. So there's some of the old favorites. So I can toggle on visibility and zoom in and see the value used. So I can see I've got a lot of 30 meters, which is usually what we recommend for visibility. But I'm expecting to see that at most of my giveaway locations. So there's a lot of visibility used. And similarly, look through is on links adjacent to giveaways. So I can see that that's been, I'd be expecting to see that applied quite widely. Similarly, I can toggle on various other attributes such as headway and see the values of that, gap acceptance, the values used there if I zoom in. But I'm just going to have a little bit more of a look at these three, which are slightly newer. So firstly, I'm going to toggle on giveaway to all. So I can see I've got it used in these locations. So if I zoom in here, where I've applied it is giveaway to all has been applied on the approach to this roundabout. And crucially, it's a roundabout with multiple circulating lanes. So I'm just going to turn on the trajectories to make it slightly easier to see. So what giveaway to all does is, if I consider the left turn from here, going around like that, that left turn stays in the inside lane all the way around. And whereas the right turn from the south here, up and round, and that stays in this lane. And actually, there's no conflict between the two, lane-based conflict. The vehicles could go round quite happily without conflicting. So if giveaway to all is turned off, what will happen is this left turn vehicle will pull out and turn left, knowing that the vehicle in this lane won't pull over and block it. Now, in reality, we generally think that more often than not, the vehicle in this lane will give way to this vehicle, even if the vehicle's not going left, because either it might not be indicating, they might not trust it, even if it is indicating. So in general, we think it's good practice to apply giveaway to all on all roundabout approaches with multiple circulating lanes. Now, there's a couple of examples I can think of near me, and where I know that people pull out in this sort of situation turning left. So it's not necessarily correct not to use it, or so if you want to toggle a feature on and off, it's a link property here, and it can be toggled off. So if I toggle it off, what it will mean is that the left turning vehicle will pull out if there's a right turner here. It doesn't mean it will pull out if there's a vehicle that directly conflicts with it in lane one. It's just if there's no lane-based conflict. And if I turn it back on again, I can actually change the level of adherence. So previously I had it set at 100 but I've changed that to 50, and what that means is that half of the vehicles will abide by the give way to all rules and half won't. So we think that's good practice to apply that on all roundabout approaches with multiple circulating lanes. So for example, I've got another roundabout here, but I've just got one circulating lane. So give way to all isn't applied because it wouldn't have any effect anyway. Next one I'm going to go to is give way to oncoming traffic. So I've got that applied in these locations. And if I zoom in on this one, it's applied to this this link here. So it's vehicles traveling in that direction. So I've got it toggled on there. And what I'm modeling here is there's a built out curb at about this point where vehicles coming this direction are forced to move out and give way to the oncoming traffic. It's a traffic calming measure. So I've applied that here, and there's a calibration factor that can be changed, which is currently set at 3, but can be changed to give the correct behavior at this location. So I've used that to model some traffic coming in these 3 locations. And also we've got give way to offside, which I've got toggled on. You can see with a green dot at this location. So give way to offside is used to model mini roundabout behavior in a simple way. So if I zoom in on this location, what I can see is I've got all the movements at this location are coded as medium, meaning everyone's giving way. But what give way to offside toggled on means they give way to vehicles on their offside, i.e. on the right as you approach the roundabout. So it's just a simple way of modeling basic mini roundabout behavior. So as I said, network review, very useful for checking your overall network, see what settings you've got applied, and if it seems that appropriate values have been used. One last thing I do on the edit network screen before I move on is do some routing checks. Now this is definitely something that probably isn't done enough by anyone, but what I like to do is go into edit network and routing, and this is even before I've necessarily got vehicles on edit network and route viewer, and pick some origin links and destination zones, and just check the route choices between these and see that they are sensible. So what have I got here? Yeah, so I can see between these 2 points I've got a bit of a split between these 2 routes, and I'll either know, or I'll know whether that's sensible or not. And I can if that's not reasonable, I can make changes to the model to try and deal with that. Another example would be things like, if I look at this route, for example, I might think about, just for the purposes of the display, increasing the perturbation. So this isn't part of the actual model operation. It's just for display, and what it might show is some different routes that vehicles use. So yeah, so what I can see I've got here, I've turned the perturbation up just to reflect what might happen as delay builds up in my network, and I can see that I've got vehicles making the left turn out of here and U-turning at the roundabout in order to make a right turn. So I might want to consider maybe, if I think that's unreasonable, applying a defined route from here to here, just to force everyone to turn right rather than U-turning at the roundabout. But if I think that is a legitimate movement that people might make, then that's absolutely fine. I just briefly touch on public transport. So if I go to edit network and public transport, there are 2 key things here. Firstly, is make sure everything's named sensibly. So I can see here I've got service name 33 southbound. The route I'm using is 33 southbound, and the schedule I'm using is 33 southbound. So that makes it very easy to check that everything matches up. So that should be the same for all of my services. But the key thing that actually gets missed here is not the routes and the services and the schedules so much, but the easiest thing to miss that we see most often is dwell times. So each stop has its own set of dwell times, and it can be quite easy to forget to put something in here, because if you don't put anything in, the dwell times will be set at 0, and the bus effectively won't stop at these locations. So this is good practice to make sure you've definitely got something in there. Otherwise, it's not giving you a very realistic model of the public transport behavior, especially if it's where buses are interacting with general traffic. So once you're happy, you've looked at your network, it can move on to the demand. Now, there isn't quite so much to check in here. Again, it's useful to make sure that the naming is done sensibly. So I've got 3 demand sets, AM into peak PM, and then 3 matrices. And the sort of thing I'd be checking is if I go to my matrix total, does that match what I'd expect to see? What's in the report or what's in my demand development spreadsheet? So I'd probably be checking those for my 3 matrix levels and my 3 demand sets. Similarly, my vehicle type proportions. So matrix 1 for me is car, matrix 2 is LGV, and matrix 3 is a mixture between medium and heavy goods. So I can see that my totals are all 100%, which is obviously what I need. And if I look at my medium and heavy goods proportions, if I change them, if I change the demand set, I can see they vary by time period, which is probably sensible, but again, might want to check that that's been done correctly. And profiling, again, the key here is just naming, because I've got all my profiles named sensibly, it becomes easier to review them. So I can see I've got several general profiles and then some profiles for origin zones. I can check that the times that they're applying to, so I can see I've got 7 to 10 for these profiles. I've got numbers in there, and that they all add up. I want to check that they add up to 100, so I can, if I just quickly go through my profiles, I should see that the profile total is always 100, because then it's releasing everything related to the relevant movements. And if I go on to the profile assignment, I can check that the profiles have been assigned correctly, especially if they're named sensibly. So if I click on from zone 1, I can see that that's applied in my assignment matrix. I can see that that's applied to the movements from zone 1. Similarly, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. Makes it much easier to check if they're named sensibly rather than just profile 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. I can also compare this across my demand sets and my matrices. And then the last thing to do, once you're happy with all of that, is, and again, I'm not sure this is something that is necessarily done enough, is watch the model run. Make sure you watch it run, especially at key junctions. What's happening? Is there anything strange? Is there anything strange? Is there anything that looks unusual? If so, there's probably something wrong. There's probably some coding error somewhere. So this is probably the most important way of checking your model, is just watch it, see if anything jumps out. You can also in Visualize use vehicle marking, which is particularly helpful if you want to look at lane use at a complicated junction like here. If you've got an issue because your model is very big and it takes ages to run, and it's not that easy to watch it from the start like I'm doing here, make sure when you run your model in the background you collect your snapshots, because if you collect snapshots, you can jump to, say, later on in the period, see congestion has built up, and then it's easier to watch the behaviors at those times if you need to. And in fact, that's the final point I'm going to make, is snapshots. So this is something that I come across quite often, is when you run your model, say to collect your final results for your report, make sure you always have snapshots toggled on, and that once you've run your model to collect, say, in this case, my final 20 runs, is go back to Visualize, load up your 20 runs worth of snapshots, and just check through them just to make sure there's either no gridlocked runs or nothing else has gone on, or there's no strange queuing, nothing that you want to address before you start reporting on your runs. And that is a brief overview of our model review process, and that's all I've got in terms of presentation. So over to Malcolm, if there's anything you want to talk about on top of that.
Thanks, Graham, for that. And yeah, there's obviously like a lot in there that you got through, and so hopefully if it was a bit quicker, there's a bit much for anyone there, that the recording afterwards will be a useful resource to go back and look after. But thanks, Graham. I think you explained lots of different aspects really well. So I'd love to just maybe try and open up to some questions. We've got 15 minutes left. I'm seeing a few different things coming in the chat. We have had, there were a couple of comments in the chat from Inaki and Jenny around the perturbation and the root viewer. And so it might be worth just saying that one of the aspects of perturbation within Paramics Discovery is that it does get recalculated as the root is built. So if you were to set a perturbation level of 5%, that 5% will be getting recalculated as the root goes through each link. And so the root in the end can have a perturbation greater than 5% for the whole root. And that was the point that Inaki was making about could we cap that for larger roots? And I wonder if that might also be the same thing that means that we get the sort of faint lines appearing in the network, which might seem unrealistic. Well, I can see, Jenny, that you're now saying that you're referring a bit more to S-Paramics rather than in Paramics Discovery. So let me open it up to questions. If you've got a question, if you would like to just come in and share a comment, or maybe you've got some experience of reviewing networks like this that you'd like to share, please just say a message in the chat like you'd like to jump in, and we'll gladly do that. It'd be lovely to hear from a few different voices here this afternoon. I can see Rob saying there, yeah, visualization is a central part of calibrating and validating a model. Completely agree with that. I think often we're kind of, when we're reviewing a model, we're sort of acting as a bit of a detective, and just by looking at the simulation, seeing it in action is a great way to kind of pick up where there might be any problems or issues. Okay, I can see a few people typing, so I'll just respond to the chat that's coming in. So Vladik is asking about modelling cyclists and pedestrians. Any plans to improve these areas? Yeah, we are actually planning to look at both those areas in the next couple of years. We're conscious that Paramics is primarily a microsimulation tool, which is the simulation of road networks. And so we do want to stay focused on that area. We're not planning to become a pedestrian modeling tool, but we're also really conscious that cyclists and pedestrians are a big part of the road network and shared space around that road network, and becoming more important. So it is an area that we are investing in the next couple of years. We've done some preliminary work in starting to get a little bit more flexibility around the way that we can simulate vehicles, and actually some of the cycling behavior that we can get on the road networks, and also pedestrian behavior, is something we're starting to look at. But it's not going to be kind of full-blown pedestrian modeling tool. It's going to be much more the trying to get that interaction on the road network more enhanced, and for visualization purposes as well. I can see Daniel typing. Oh, that's just come in. Is the push for decide and provide? I'm gonna have to throw some questions to you in a minute, Graham. It's a push for decide and provide, as opposed to predict and provide, altering your planned future development of Paramics Discovery. Well, it's a really good question. It's definitely something that we're more conscious of and more aware of. I think in many respects, Paramics Discovery is a tool that can function in both those paradigms, and there's probably more onus on how the software is used rather than necessarily how it's developed. But we will of course stay very open and listening to future developments in that kind of decide and provide paradigm that could be useful. So we'd be very happy to hear any ideas around what would be useful to include in Paramics Discovery itself for that. If anyone wants to jump in and ask a question in person, they'd be more than welcome. So please just let us know, and you can spare yourself the effort of typing. Graham, is there anything else you want to add in terms of what people might do as a kind of follow on from your session today to take it a bit further?
Well, there's plenty of information on the sports site, as usual, under the sort of solutions section. I think it's labelled. There's always a lot of good stuff there, and I think if this is something that people are more interested in, this was essentially a super condensed version of the audit course. I think that would be a fair assessment, and I think I'm not sure we're planning on running audit courses anytime soon, but if not, I'm sure that could be arranged if there was demand. Does that seem fair?
Yeah, we'll be running all our training courses in the autumn, and certainly the model audit course will be one of those, and we can of course provide that on a private basis as well, on demand. So yeah, I think that's a good point actually. The audit course is a kind of takes a lot of the things that you've touched on today and expands them further. It gives a wee bit more depth on some of the parameters used and some more of the background of the good practice as well. So it's a very useful resource, but you've covered a lot in 45 minutes today. That's also on that.
Yeah.
Okay, Jenny's asking her usual question. Any plans for releasing a reference manual for Discovery or update the best practice guide? So yeah, we're not planning to do a full reference manual for Discovery. We have decided to channel our resources to do more kind of nimble and updates using video tutorials. We do have PDF tutorials as well, and all our training courses. But we have taken this comment seriously, Jenny. We did receive this from a few different people in the Paramics survey that we ran earlier in the year, and so we are actually working at the moment. We've got a couple of people working on our support centre, reviewing everything we've got there and plugging some of the gaps. So you will be seeing a lot more knowledge-based articles coming through on the support centre. We'll be seeing more video tutorials coming on some of the things that we haven't covered yet. And there'll also be more cross-referencing between our different parts of our documentation so that you can link a bit better between the different guidelines and tutorials and things that we produce. So there will be some movement in that direction and hopefully making life a bit easier. James is asking, can we put a request in to bring back the annual user group meeting? Yes, well, I mean, obviously the last couple of years we've been doing things very differently. We have been running these workshops now for about 12, 15 years, and usually they've been in person. We've been doing them in cities across the UK and Ireland, usually about 7 or 8 venues at a time. Obviously the last 2 years with the workshops, we've been we've come online because of the various restrictions that we've all been that have been applied to all of us. We do hope to be back in person. That's probably the first thing to say, is we do want to be back in person in the workshops, because there's definitely no substitute for that, we feel. So we want to get back to that next year. In terms of an annual user group meeting, it's something that we would be open to and interested in. I think where we've tried to get, I think what it really is going to rely on is a bit more engagement from the wider user community. And so what we'd love to start seeing, if an annual user group meeting is going to be viable, is actually, I guess, a desire to share what you've been using Paramics for, the projects you've been working on, what you're learning, what you're finding out, and so on. So the workshops tend to be coming largely from us, from the Paramics microsimulation team, and offering what we can, whereas the user groups in the past were much more a kind of shared community event, which was bringing together that input from various sources. And so we'd be really open to it if we thought the demand was there. We haven't really sensed that in the last few years, which is why that hasn't really happened, and we've gone more down the workshop route. But we're open to listening, so let us know if you would like to present, if you would like to show some of the work you've been doing, and we get enough interest in that, then I think it's the kind of event that we could do in the future. Okay, thanks for all those questions, and it's nice to see several familiar names. Sorry not to be able to be with you in person today, but I hope you've enjoyed this session that Graham has offered. And as I say, it's going to be recorded, so you'll be able to refer back to it. Please do sign up for the next few that are coming up. We'll be covering a case study next week in low emission zones. Then the following week, we'll be looking at outputs from Paramics Discovery, and then we'll look at our software news and what we're developing in the next little while. So hopefully we'll see you all there. Thanks again for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure to be with you, and hopefully we'll see you again next week.
Yep, thank you.